A girl sees an injured old woman protecting a baby from a snake. Then she does this. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me what city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The suffocating July heat in Savannah made the asphalt of the city market feel like a hot plate under Grace's bare feet. The 4-year-old girl, with tangled brown hair and wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big for her, scavenged through the leftover fruit scattered on the ground between the stalls that were already closing for lunch. Her dark eyes, too large for her thin face, shone with the hope of finding something edible among the bruised tomatoes and blackened bananas that the vendors discarded. She had learned from a young age that late morning was the best time to find food, when the merchants cleaned their stalls and threw out the spoiled produce. Grace's stomach rumbled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything solid in 2 days. The previous night, she had only managed a few sips of water from the public fountain in the square and a piece of hard bread a pious lady had offered her. But that wasn't enough for a growing child who spent her days walking the dusty city streets. As she bent down to pick up a piece of watermelon that still looked salvageable, a desperate scream echoed through the market's corridors. It was a sharp sound, full of pain and terror, that made Grace lift her head immediately. The scream came from somewhere behind the main stalls, in the area where the smaller shops that sold fabrics and sewing supplies were located. Driven by a childlike curiosity mixed with genuine concern, Grace abandoned the piece of fruit and walked toward the sound. Her small feet made muffled noises on the concrete floor as she rounded a pile of empty crates and headed toward the back of the fabric store, Evelyn's embroidery. What she saw made her stop abruptly. A grey-haired lady wearing a blue and yellow floral dress was lying on the dirty concrete floor, holding something to her chest with one hand while the other clutched her leg, which was bleeding through a tear in her pantyhose. But what most caught Grace's attention was the snake writhing a few feet away from the woman. It was a copperhead, about 3 feet long, its brownish scales glistening in the sun that filtered through the gap between the buildings. The serpent swayed its head from side to side, clearly agitated and ready to strike again. Between the snake and the lady, on the ground, was a light pink blanket from which low crying sounds were coming, a baby's cry. The lady, who Grace would later learn was named Evelyn, looked terrified at the snake, trying to protect whatever was in her arms. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face as she murmured inaudible words, clearly in a state of panic. Her injured leg prevented her from moving, and with each passing second, the copperhead seemed to get more aggressive. Grace, despite being only 4, had developed sharp survival instincts during her life on the streets. She knew snakes were dangerous, but she also knew they usually attacked when they felt threatened or cornered. She looked around quickly, searching for something she could use to help. There, leaning against the back wall of the store, was an old broom with a splintered wooden handle. Without a second thought, Grace ran to it and grabbed it with her small hands. The broom was heavy for her, but adrenaline gave her enough strength to lift it. With decisive movements that contrasted with her age, Grace approached the snake, making noise with her feet on the ground and waving the broom in the air. The copperhead, startled by the sudden movement and noise, turned toward this new threat. For a tense moment, the girl and the snake faced each other. "Get out of here! Go away!" Grace shouted in her thin but determined voice, hitting the broom on the ground near the snake without getting too close. The copperhead, realizing it was outnumbered and preferring to avoid a confrontation, quickly slithered toward a pile of debris at the back of the lot and disappeared among the stones and dry branches. Only when the snake was completely out of sight did Grace drop the broom and run to the fallen lady. Evelyn looked at the girl with a mixture of gratitude and amazement, still trembling from the scare and the pain in her leg. "Thank you, my dear girl," Evelyn said weakly, adjusting what she held against her chest. That's when Grace could see clearly. A newborn baby, wrapped in a pink blanket, sleeping peacefully in the lady's arms, oblivious to all the danger that had passed. "Are you badly hurt, Mum?" Grace asked, crouching beside Evelyn and looking at the wound on her leg. The cut didn't look very deep, but it was bleeding a lot, staining the beige pantyhose and dripping onto the floor. "I'll be fine, dear, but I need to get little Noah inside the shop. Can you help me up?" Evelyn asked, trying to lean on one elbow. Grace, though small, was stronger than she looked. She put an arm around Evelyn's waist and helped her stand up slowly. Together, they walked slowly to the back door of the shop, which was ajar. The interior was cool and smelled of new fabric and lavender. As she helped Evelyn sit in a wooden chair near the counter, Grace couldn't stop looking at the baby. Noah was a perfect newborn, with pink skin and dark hair that already showed little curls. He slept deeply, his fists clenched near his face. "Is he your grandson?" Grace asked innocently, watching how Evelyn held the baby with so much affection. Evelyn hesitated for a moment, her face showing a complicated expression that Grace was too young to fully interpret. It's complicated, my dear Noah. He needed someone to take care of him." At that moment, Grace felt something she had never experienced before, a deep, inexplicable desire to protect both this kind lady and the helpless baby. It was as if an invisible force was pulling her to stay there, to become part of this small, improvised family. What Grace didn't know was that this moment marked the beginning of a journey that would reveal secrets buried for years and completely change the course of her lonely life on the streets of Savannah. 3 days had passed since the incident with the snake, and Grace remained at the embroidery shop as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Evelyn had insisted that the girl stay at least until her leg healed completely, but in truth, neither of them wanted this temporary arrangement to end. The shop was a welcoming refuge compared to the hostile streets. It smelled of clean fabric and glycerin soap, and the organized shelves with colorful threads created a rainbow that fascinated Grace. She had found a little corner near the sewing machine where she had made a sort of nest with some soft scraps, and that's where she slept every night. But what impressed Evelyn the most was the way Grace cared for baby Noah. The girl seemed to have a natural instinct for childcare that went far beyond her age. She knew exactly how to hold the baby to burp him, how to calm him when he cried, and even prepared his bottles with a precision that perplexed Evelyn. "Where did you learn to take care of a baby like that, my child?" Evelyn asked one morning, watching Grace rock Noah with gentle, natural movements. "I don't know. I think I always knew," Grace replied, continuing to hum a low melody that made the baby relax immediately. "My grandma used to sing that song before she went away." Evelyn noticed the sadness that passed through the girl's eyes when she mentioned her grandmother, but she didn't want to press the issue. In 3 days of living together, she had learned that Grace was private about her past, and she respected that boundary. The routine they established was simple but comforting. Grace helped Evelyn with small tasks in the shop, organizing threads, folding fabrics, sweeping the floor, while Evelyn handled the more technical aspects of the business. During breaks, they both doted on Noah, who proved to be a calm and smiling baby. But this peace would be abruptly shattered on Thursday afternoon. Robert Miller, Evelyn's son, had returned from a business trip to Atlanta earlier than expected. At 42, he was a man of average build, always well-dressed, and with a serious expression that rarely softened. He worked as a sales representative for an industrial machinery company and spent most of his time traveling between cities in Georgia and the Carolinas. When he opened the shop door on that sunny afternoon, expecting to find only his mother organizing her embroidery as always, he was faced with a scene that left him completely speechless. Grace was sitting on the floor, playing with Noah on an extended blanket, humming softly while the baby tried to grab her fingers. Evelyn, nearby, was stitching an embroidery on a dish towel. smiling at the scene with a look of contentment that Robert hadn't seen on her face in years. "Mom, what the hell is going on here?" Robert asked, dropping his travel bag on the floor with a thud that startled Noah, making him cry. Grace immediately picked the baby up, rocking him gently to calm him, while shooting a disapproving look at Robert. Evelyn stood up quickly, clearly nervous about her son's unexpected arrival. "Robert, dear, you're back early." "I can explain," Evelyn began, but Robert interrupted her. "Explain what? Why is there a street kid in our shop? And where did this baby come from?" His words were laden with irritation and suspicion. "She's not a street kid," Evelyn defended, instinctively placing herself between her son and Grace. "This is Grace, and she saved me. She saved both of us." Robert looked at the girl carefully for the first time. He saw her tangled hair, her clearly worn clothes, her bare, dirty feet. Everything about her screamed neglect and need. "Saved you from what, Mom?" "From a copperhead. She chased away the snake that attacked me behind the shop if it weren't for her." Evelyn automatically touched her leg, where a bandage still covered the wound. "And the baby? Where did this baby come from?" Robert insisted, his voice getting louder. Evelyn hesitated, looking at Noah in Grace's arms. He was abandoned at the shop's door 3 days ago. I couldn't just leave an innocent child on the street." "Mom, have you lost your mind? You can't just adopt children who show up at your door. That's illegal. And this girl," he pointed at Grace, "is probably a thief waiting for the right opportunity to steal something." Robert's words hit Grace like slaps. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept her chin up, continuing to rock Noah, who had started to cry again. "I'm not a thief," she said in a firm voice despite the tears. "I just wanted to help Mrs. Evelyn and the baby." "I'm calling CPS right now," Robert declared, taking his phone from his pocket. "For both her and the baby. This place has turned into a circus." "No!" Evelyn shouted with a vehemence that surprised even herself. "Robert, please listen to me. This girl is special. In 3 days, she has shown more care and affection for Noah than many mothers show for their own children, and for me. She took care of me when I was hurt and scared." Robert paused with the phone in his hand, observing the determination on his mother's face. It had been a long time since he'd seen her so decided about something. "Mom, you're 77 years old. You can't take care of 2 children. And this girl will bring trouble. You can be sure of it. Where there's a street kid, there's trafficking, there's violence, there's—" "Stop!" interrupted Grace, her voice small but full of dignity. "I didn't bring any of that. I just wanted a family. But if you don't want me here, I'll go." She stood up carefully, still holding Noah, and walked to where she had left her few belongings, a cloth doll with one arm and a piece of bread wrapped in paper. Evelyn's heart ached as she watched the girl prepare to leave. In the last 3 days, she had experienced a feeling she hadn't felt in decades, that of being truly needed, of having a purpose beyond simply existing. "Grace, don't go," she pleaded, holding the girl's hand. "Robert, look at her. Really look. Do you see evil in this child?" Robert observed Grace more closely. He saw how she held Noah with such care, how her tears fell silently without any drama, how her chin trembled, but she maintained her dignity. "It's not a matter of evil, Mom. It's a matter of responsibility. You can't." "Can't what?" "Help a child in need. Give shelter to someone who needs it. Have you forgotten the values I tried to teach you?" Evelyn's voice was filled with disappointment. At that moment, a shrill voice from the street interrupted the tense discussion. "Evelyn! Evelyn Miller!" someone shouted from outside the shop. They all turned toward the door. It was Karen Smith, the 58-year-old gossipy neighbor who owned a cosmetics shop 2 doors down. Karen was known throughout the neighborhood for knowing everyone's business and for spreading information, not always accurate, with the speed of a wildfire. "Evelyn, is it true you kidnapped a child?" Karen asked, practically shouting so that everyone on the street could hear. Evelyn turned pale. Robert clenched his fists. Grace instinctively hid behind a shelf, still holding Noah. The situation, already complicated, had become a public nightmare. Karen's accusation echoed down the street like thunder on a clear day. Within minutes, a small crowd of onlookers began to form in front of the embroidery shop. Mrs. Carmen from the bakery approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Mr. Peters, a retiree who spent his afternoons in the square, came running with his cane. Even some children abandoned their games to see what was happening. "Karen, for God's sake, what are you talking about?" Evelyn asked, trying to keep her voice calm as she partially closed the shop door to protect Grace and Noah from prying eyes. "Don't play innocent with me, Evelyn Miller," Karen retorted, crossing her arms over her voluminous chest and speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "John from the pharmacy told me you're hiding a kidnapped child in here, and Nancy said she saw you with a baby that isn't yours." Robert positioned himself at the door, blocking the onlooker's view of the shop's interior. His expression had changed from irritation to genuine concern. Regardless of his opinion on the situation, he would not allow his mother to be publicly humiliated. "Karen, you're talking nonsense. My mother didn't kidnap anyone," he said firmly. "Then explain why there's a street kid and an unknown baby in her shop," Karen insisted, moving closer to the door. "Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about it. They say she's lost her mind and is collecting abandoned children." Inside the shop, Grace remained hidden behind the shelf, holding Noah against her chest. The baby began to cry softly, as if sensing the tension in the air. The girl automatically started humming the same melody that always calmed him, but her voice trembled with nervousness. Evelyn looked through the crack in the door and saw the familiar faces of her neighbors, people she had lived with for decades, now watching her with suspicion and judgment. Her heart tightened as she realized how Karen's words had planted seeds of doubt in minds that had always respected her. "Listen, everyone," Evelyn said, opening the door completely and stepping out onto the sidewalk. Her voice was firm, but her hands trembled slightly. "I haven't kidnapped anyone. The girl with me saved me from a venomous snake, and the baby was abandoned at my door. I'm just offering temporary shelter until we find a proper solution." "Temporary?" Karen scoffed. "They've been in there for 3 days, and you haven't even notified the authorities. That's a crime, Evelyn." Mr. Peters, who had always been fond of Evelyn, spoke up. "Karen, Mrs. Evelyn has always been an upright person. If she says she's helping, it's because she is." "Upright?" Karen laughed with disdain. "A 77-year-old woman raising 2 children alone. That's not upright, it's madness. And you'll all be accomplices if you don't do something." Mrs. Carmen, more diplomatic, approached Evelyn. "Evelyn, dear, Karen might be exaggerating, but she's right about one thing. You needed to seek official help. Child Protective Services, the police, someone." "And hand 2 innocent children over to the system?" Evelyn responded with passion. "You know what it's like. They'll be separated, placed in overcrowded shelters, traumatized even more. I couldn't do that." Robert watched the argument with growing discomfort. He saw how his mother was being cornered by the neighbors and felt a confusing mix of protectiveness and irritation. Part of him agreed that she should have contacted the authorities, but another part admired her courage in protecting the children. Inside the shop, Grace heard every word through the ajar door. Noah had stopped crying, but she continued to rock him gently, more to calm herself than to calm him. Karen's words hurt her deeply, especially because they confirmed her worst fears. She wasn't welcome anywhere. She would always be seen as a problem. "I'm leaving," she whispered to Noah, as if the baby could understand her. "I'm leaving before Mrs. Evelyn gets into more trouble because of me." But when she tried to stand up, her legs failed her. 3 days of care, of regular food, of a roof over her head had awakened in her a desperate need to belong somewhere. The thought of returning to the streets, especially now carrying the responsibility of caring for Noah, terrified her. Outside, the argument had intensified. More neighbors approached, creating a veritable public tribunal on the sidewalk in front of the shop. Opinions were divided between those who supported Evelyn and those who agreed with Karen about the need to involve the authorities. "Look at all of you," said a new voice, cutting through the shouting. It was Nancy, a 60-year-old woman who lived at the end of the street. "Arguing like vultures around a carcass, when you should be thinking about the children's well-being." "Exactly what I'm talking about," Karen exclaimed triumphantly. "The children's well-being. That's why they need to be handed over to someone who knows how to care for them properly." "And who says Evelyn doesn't know how to care for them properly?" Nancy retorted. "She raised Robert on her own after her husband died, and he turned out to be a fine man. I trust her care more than any government shelter." The mention of Evelyn's late husband brought a moment of awkward silence. Everyone there knew the story of John Miller, who had died in a work accident when Robert was only 12, leaving Evelyn to raise their son and run the small business alone. Robert seized the moment of silence to make a decision. "All right," he said loudly, making everyone turn to him. "I'll handle this now." Evelyn looked at her son with apprehension, fearing what he would do. Robert entered the shop, leaving the door open so everyone could see and hear. "Grace," he called softly, surprising the girl with the gentle tone of his voice. "Come here, please." Grace emerged hesitantly from behind the shelf, still carrying Noah. Her cheeks were wet with silent tears, but she held her head high with a dignity touching for a 4-year-old. "Everyone wants to see you and the baby," Robert said, extending a hand to her. "You don't have to be afraid." With her heart pounding, Grace accepted Robert's hand and walked with him to the door. The small crowd fell silent as they saw her. It was impossible to look at that small, thin girl holding a baby with such care and see a threat or danger. "This is Grace," Robert announced to everyone. "She is 4 years old and saved my mother from a snake bite that could have been fatal. And this is Noah, a baby who was abandoned and found safety in her arms." Karen, seeing that the situation wasn't going the way she had hoped, tried to regain control. "That's very nice, Robert, but it doesn't change the fact that..." Robert interrupted her, his voice gaining strength. "My mother did what any decent person would do. She protected those in need of protection. And if that bothers some of you, that's your problem, not hers." Robert's public declaration of support took Evelyn completely by surprise. She looked at her son with tears in her eyes, realizing that, despite all his previous objections, he had chosen to side with his family when it really mattered. But Karen was not willing to give up easily. "A very nice speech, Robert, but what about when these children bring trouble? And when the real parents show up? And when the police come to investigate?" It was then that Grace, surprising everyone, took a step forward. With Noah still in her arms, she looked directly at Karen and said in her small but clear voice, "I won't bring any trouble. I just want to take care of Noah and help Mrs. Evelyn. If that makes you angry, I'm sorry, but I'm not leaving just because you don't like me." The silence that followed was total. A 4-year-old child had confronted an adult with more dignity and maturity than many would expect. Mrs. Carmen discreetly wiped her eyes. Mr. Peters smiled and nodded in approval. Even some of the more skeptical neighbors seemed touched by the girl's courage. Karen, realizing she had lost the support of the majority, muttered some inaudible words and walked away, promising to anyone who would listen that this wouldn't end well. When the crowd finally dispersed, Evelyn, Robert, and Grace went back inside the shop. The silence that settled was heavy, filled with unsaid words and decisions that needed to be made. It was Robert who would break that silence, but with words that no one expected to hear. "Grace," Robert said after a long silence, crouching down to be at the girl's level, "I need to ask you a very important question, and I want you to be completely honest with me." The girl looked at him with her big, attentive eyes, adjusting Noah in her small arms. Evelyn watched the scene with apprehension, not knowing what to expect from her son. "Where exactly were you living before you came here? Is anyone looking for you?" Grace looked down, as if the question made her relive painful memories. "I slept in the square, behind the church, sometimes under the pharmacy's awning when it rained hard. There's no one looking for me. No." "And your family? Your parents? Any relatives?" "My grandma took care of me," Grace murmured, her voice getting even lower. "But she got very sick and had to go away to a place where I couldn't go with her. She said she'd come back, but it's been a long time." Evelyn's heart ached with the sadness in the child's voice. She recognized that kind of pain, the pain of being left behind by life's circumstances. "And do you remember where your grandmother left you?" Robert asked gently. Grace thought for a moment, then pointed vaguely toward the back of the shop. "Back there, near those old buildings. She cried a lot and said it was just for a little while, that someone would take care of me." Robert and Evelyn exchanged a look heavy with meaning. The old buildings were exactly where they had found Noah, at the back entrance of the shop. "Grace, when did this happen? Do you remember?" Robert insisted, his voice carrying an urgency he tried to disguise. It was when the trees had no leaves," she answered, trying to calculate the time as a 4-year-old could. "And then it got cold, and then hot, and then cold again, and now it's hot again. A year, maybe a little more." Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, realizing the terrible coincidence that was unfolding. "Robert," she whispered, "you don't think—" "Not yet, Mom," he interrupted her gently, but continued questioning Grace. "Do you remember what your grandma was like? What was her name?" "Grandma Clara," Grace replied immediately, a sad smile appearing on her face. "She had long, dark hair, and she always smelled like herbal soap. She knew how to make really good oatmeal porridge, and knew a lot of songs." The name struck Evelyn like a bolt of lightning. Clara. There was only one Clara she knew, and the connection her mind was making was both impossible and terribly logical. Robert noticed his mother's reaction and continued his questions, now with more urgency. "Grace, did your grandmother ever mention where she worked, or talk about any family?" "She said she had a very mean mother who didn't like her," Grace recalled, rocking slightly to calm Noah, who had started to stir, "and that one day, when she got better, she was going to get her little girl and come get me too." "Her little girl?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, Grandma Clara always cried when she talked about her. She said she had to leave her little girl with the mean grandma because she couldn't take care of both of us at the same time. But when she got better, she would bring the whole family together." The silence that settled in the shop was heavy with the weight of the accumulating revelations. Evelyn sat down heavily in her chair, her legs no longer able to support her. "Robert," she said in a weak voice, "I need to tell you something I've never told anyone." Grace continued to rock Noah, oblivious to the growing tension between the adults, but sensing that something important was happening. "5 years ago," Evelyn began, choosing her words carefully, "a young woman showed up here at the shop. She was pregnant, desperate, asking for work. She said she had nowhere to go, that her own mother had kicked her out of the house because of the pregnancy." Robert encouraged her to continue with a nod, although his face showed that he was beginning to understand where the story was going. "I hired her to help me in the shop. She was a good girl, hard-working, but she had problems. Problems with drinking. I tried to help her. I took her to the doctor. I did what I could. When the child was born, it was a girl, Robert completed, his voice almost a whisper. She was a beautiful girl with dark hair and big eyes, but the mother, Clara, couldn't take proper care of her. She drank too much, disappeared for days, left the baby crying here in the shop. I warned her it couldn't go on like that. Grace stopped rocking and looked at Evelyn with full attention, as if she knew instinctively that this story was about her. One day, she disappeared, Evelyn continued, tears starting to stream down her face. She took the girl and never came back. She left some clothes, some diapers, and a letter saying she was going to find a better place to raise her daughter. And you never heard from her again? Robert asked. Never again. Until 3 days ago, when I found this baby at my door. Evelyn looked at Noah in Grace's arms. And now, finding out that Grace was abandoned in the same place. You think they're siblings? Robert's question echoed in the silent shop. Grace, who had followed the whole conversation with the limited understanding of a 4-year-old, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Was Grandma Clara's little girl me? Evelyn reached out and gently touched Grace's face. My dear, I think so. You have your mother's eyes, the same way you tilt your head when you're thinking. So Noah is my little brother? Grace asked, looking at the baby in her arms with an expression of mixed astonishment and joy. It's possible, Evelyn answered carefully. Very possible. At that moment, Grace did something that surprised both adults. Instead of getting emotional or asking questions, she simply kissed Noah's forehead and said, I already knew he was special. From the first day, I felt I needed to take care of him. Robert watched the scene, his elderly mother, emotional from the revelations, a 4-year-old girl showing an impossible maturity for her age, a baby sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the fact that he had just possibly found his only family, and felt something changing inside him. Mom, he said slowly, are you sure you don't know where Clara is now? Evelyn shook her head. I never heard from her again, but I always wondered. I always felt guilty for not doing more to help her. And if she comes back, Robert asked, what if she comes looking for her children? The question brought a new dimension to the situation. If Clara was indeed the mother of Grace and Noah, she had legal rights over them. But she had also abandoned them both under circumstances that suggested she was not in a condition to care for them properly. I don't know, Evelyn admitted, but I know I can't let these children go back to a situation of abandonment and neglect. Neither can I, Robert said, surprising both himself and his mother with the firmness of his words. If they really are siblings, if Clara is really their mother, then we'll have to find a way to protect them. Grace looked from one adult to the other, processing the words with her precocious intelligence. You're not going to send me away. No, Robert answered without hesitation. We're not sending you away. But even as he made that promise, a terrible worry grew in his chest. If Karen had spread the story around the neighborhood, how many other people would know about the situation? And what if one of those people decided to inform the authorities? And most importantly, what if Clara really did show up, possibly in the same problematic condition as years ago, demanding her children back? The peace they had found in the last 3 days was more fragile than any of them imagined, and the day's revelations had made everything much more complicated. Outside, Karen was walking back to her shop with her phone in hand, dialing a number she had saved a long time ago, the number for the Savannah Child Protective Services. The next morning brought a tense atmosphere that hung over the embroidery shop like a heavy cloud. Evelyn had spent a sleepless night, alternating between caring for Noah and watching Grace sleep in her makeshift corner. The previous day's revelation had changed everything. Now she wasn't just sheltering 2 abandoned children, but possibly caring for grandchildren she never knew she had. Robert had decided to cancel his next business trip, something unheard of in his 15 years as a sales representative. He had settled into the small apartment above the shop, where he usually stayed when visiting his mother, but this time with the intention of staying indefinitely. "Grace, dear, could you help me with something?" Evelyn asked as the girl ate her breakfast, bread with butter and warm milk, luxuries she still couldn't believe were real. "Of course, Mrs. Evelyn," Grace replied, always willing to help. "Do you remember any mark or sign your Grandma Clara had? Anything that made her different from other people?" Grace thought for a moment, chewing slowly. "She had a scar here," she said, pointing to her own right wrist. "Shaped like a moon. She said it was an accident when she was a child." Evelyn and Robert exchanged significant glances. "And do you have a similar mark?" Evelyn asked gently. Grace extended her right arm and showed a small crescent-shaped birthmark in the exact same spot she had described on her grandmother. "I have this one. Grandma Clara always said we were the same." "And Noah?" Robert asked, approaching the baby who was sleeping peacefully on the blanket. Evelyn carefully lifted Noah's tiny right arm, and there it was. The same crescent-shaped mark, still small and pink because he was a newborn, but unmistakably identical to the others. "My God," Evelyn whispered, "there are no more doubts. They are siblings." Grace looked at the mark on Noah's wrist with fascination. "So we're a real family," she said with a smile that lit up the whole shop. But the peace of that moment was interrupted by firm knocks on the shop door. It was only 8 in the morning, too early for customers, and the tone of the knocks suggested official business. Robert went to answer and found a woman of about 40, well-dressed, with a clipboard in her hand and a serious expression on her face. Behind her, a younger man carried a briefcase. "Good morning. I'm Valerie Scott, a social worker from Savannah Child Protective Services. We received a report about children in an irregular situation at this establishment." Robert's heart raced, but he remained calm. "Good morning. Please come in." Valerie and her assistant entered the shop, observing everything with professional attention. Grace instinctively moved closer to Evelyn, holding her hand, while Noah continued to sleep on his blanket. "Mrs. Evelyn Miller?" Valerie asked, consulting her clipboard. "That's me," Evelyn answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "We need to talk about the 2 children under your care. We have information that one of them may have been abandoned and the other was living on the streets." "The information is correct," Robert said, deciding to be direct. "But there are special circumstances that need to be considered." Valerie made notes while observing Grace. The girl was clean, well-fed, and clearly comfortable in the environment. Noah also appeared to be healthy and well cared for. "Did you report the situation to the competent authorities?" she asked. "Not yet," Evelyn admitted. "Everything happened so quickly, and we only discovered yesterday that the children might be." "Might be what?" Valerie interrupted. "Siblings," Robert completed, "and possibly my mother's grandchildren." Valerie raised her eyebrows, clearly not expecting this information. "How so?" Evelyn told the whole story. Clara's employment at the shop 5 years ago, the birth of the first child, the disappearance, and now the discovery of the identical birthmarks. "I understand," Valerie said after hearing everything. "But even so, you can't just keep 2 children without the proper legal documentation. We need to check for birth records, if there are other relatives, if the biological mother is alive." "And while you check?" Evelyn asked with anguish. "The children go to a shelter." "That's the standard procedure," Valerie replied, though her tone was not unsympathetic. "But considering you've shown adequate care and there is a possibility of kinship, I can request an emergency temporary custody." Grace, who had followed the entire conversation in silence, finally spoke up. "Please don't separate me from Noah. He needs me." The simplicity and sincerity of the girl's words visibly touched Valerie. Grace, no one wants to separate you. We're trying to find the best way to take care of you both. The best way is to stay here, Grace said with conviction. Mrs. Evelyn takes care of us, and Mr. Robert too, and I take care of Noah. Valerie made more notes, clearly impressed with the child's maturity. Evelyn, would you be able to care for the two children while we conduct the necessary investigations? Absolutely, Evelyn replied without hesitation. And you, Mr. Robert? Do you agree to this? Robert looked at Grace, who was watching him with hope in her eyes, then at Noah, sleeping peacefully, and finally at his mother, who awaited his response with anxiety. I agree, he said firmly. These children are not leaving our family. Valerie smiled for the first time since she had arrived. Very well. I will arrange the papers for temporary custody, but there are some conditions that must be met. Over the next hour, she explained the procedures: regular medical checkups for both children, follow-up visits from CPS, school enrollment for Grace once the situation stabilized, and most importantly, full cooperation with the investigation into Clara's whereabouts. When Valerie and her assistant finally left, promising to return the next week with the temporary custody documents, the improvised family breathed a sigh of relief. We did it, Evelyn said, hugging Grace. At least for now, we get to stay together. But the tranquility was short-lived. Late that afternoon, as Evelyn prepared Noah's bottle and Grace played with some colorful scraps, the shop's bell rang again. This time, the woman who entered made Evelyn's world stop. Too thin, with dark but dull hair, simple but clean clothes, and eyes that carried years of suffering, eyes that Evelyn recognized immediately, even after 5 years. Hi, Mrs. Evelyn, the woman said with a hesitant voice. I'm Clara. I've come for my children. Grace, who had her back turned, recognized the voice even before she turned around. When she did, her eyes widened and she dropped the scraps she was holding. Grandma, she whispered, confusion and joy mixed in her small voice. Clara looked at the girl she had left a year ago, now taller, healthier, more beautiful. Tears began to stream down her face. Hi, my princess, she said, crouching down to be at the girl's level. Grandma is back. Evelyn remained motionless, holding Noah against her chest, her heart beating erratically. The person she most feared and most hoped to see had appeared, and now she didn't know whether to hand over the children or protect them. The situation, already complicated, had become impossible. The silence in the shop became almost physical, as heavy as a wet blanket on everyone present. Clara remained crouched in front of Grace, her trembling hands reaching for the girl, while tears streamed freely down her thin face. Evelyn held Noah so tightly that the baby began to stir, uncomfortable. My princess, Clara repeated, her voice choked with emotion. Grandma missed you so much. Every day I thought about you. Every day I planned how I would come get you. Grace remained still, her large eyes alternating between the woman in front of her and Evelyn behind her. The confusion was evident on her face, joy at seeing the grandmother she loved so much, mixed with the fear of losing the family she had just found. Grandma, she finally said, her voice small and hesitant, you said you'd be back soon. A long time has passed. I know, my love, I know, Clara sobbed. Grandma got sick, very sick. I had to stay in a place to get better, but now I'm well, and I've come for you and your little brother. It was then that she looked at Noah in Evelyn's arms, and her expression changed to something between astonishment and maternal ecstasy. My baby, she whispered, slowly standing up. My boy. Evelyn instinctively took a step back, clutching Noah to her chest. Clara, we need to talk before anything else. Talk about what? Clara asked, her voice gaining a defensive edge. They are my children. I've come to get them. My children, Grace repeated, confusion evident in her voice. Grandma, you're not my mother. You're my grandma. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather courage for a painful confession. My princess, I need to tell you the truth. I'm not your grandma, I'm your mother. Grace's world collapsed in that instant. Her 4 years of life had already been filled with abandonment and confusion, but this revelation was devastating. The person she knew as her grandmother, who had abandoned her with the promise of returning, was actually her mother. But you called me your granddaughter, Grace said, her voice beginning to tremble. Because I was ashamed, Clara admitted, crouching down again. Ashamed of being a mother so young, ashamed of the problems I had. I thought it would be easier for you to see me as a grandma. Robert, who had remained silent watching the scene, finally spoke up. Clara, where have you been all this time, and why did you abandon the children? Clara looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Are you Mrs. Evelyn's son? I am, and I'm asking where you were while your children needed you. The hostility in Robert's voice was palpable. Clara straightened her shoulders, trying to maintain her dignity. I was in a rehabilitation clinic. I had problems with alcohol and other things. My mother had me committed against my will. Your mother? Evelyn asked, surprised. You always said your mother was dead. I lied, Clara admitted, looking down. She's alive, but she kicked me out of the house when she found out I was pregnant with Grace. Then, when she learned about Noah, she said I was a disgrace to the family and took me to the clinic against my will. The unfolding story was even more complicated than anyone had imagined. Grace listened to everything with the full attention of a child trying to understand an adult world that seemed to make no sense. And now? Evelyn asked. Are you cured? I am, Clara said with conviction. It's been 8 months since I've had a drop to drink. I have a job. I'm a cleaner at a hospital in Atlanta. I have a small room rented, small but clean. I can take care of my children now. A small room? Robert questioned. For you and 2 children? It's temporary, Clara defended herself. I'll find something better. The important thing is that I can give them what I couldn't before, a present and sober mother. Grace, who had processed the revelation with the surprising speed of children, asked the question everyone feared. If you're my mother, do I have to go away with you? Evelyn's heart broke at the evident sadness in the girl's voice. Grace, dear, of course you do, Clara interrupted. You're my daughter. We're going to be a real family now. But I already have a family, Grace said, looking at Evelyn and Robert. They take care of me and Noah. We're happy here. Clara felt as if she had been slapped. My princess, I know they've been good to you, but I'm your mother. A child's place is with their mother. A child's place is where there's love and safety, Robert said firmly. And these children found that here. You can't stop me from taking my children, Clara reacted, her voice getting louder. I have rights, and they have rights too, Robert retorted. The right to stability, to safety, to unconditional love. The argument was escalating and Noah began to cry, frightened by the loud voices. Grace immediately approached Evelyn. Can I hold him? He's scared. Evelyn passed Noah to Grace, who automatically started humming the melody that always calmed him. In a few seconds, the baby stopped crying and relaxed in his sister's arms. Clara watched the scene with a mixture of admiration and painful jealousy. It was clear that Grace had a special connection with her brother, a natural ability to care that touched even her. How did she learn to care for him like that? Clara asked, her voice softer. Instinct, Evelyn replied. From the first day, she's cared for Noah as if she were his mother. Because I promised him I would always take care of him, Grace said, looking at Clara. I promised I would never let anyone hurt him. The girl's words carried a weight that everyone felt. There was an implicit accusation there. Grace was promising her brother the protection she herself had never received. Clara approached slowly, reaching out to touch Noah. Can I hold him?" Grace hesitated, looking to Evelyn for guidance. The retired teacher nodded gently, and Grace carefully passed her brother into Clara's arms. When Clara held Noah for the first time, her tears started again. "Hi, my baby," she whispered. "Mommy's here now." Noah looked at the unfamiliar face with curiosity, then started to cry again. Clara tried to calm him, rocking him gently, but the baby only quieted when Grace started humming her familiar melody. "He doesn't know me," Clara said, the pain evident in her voice. "Babies need time to get used to people," Evelyn said gently, even as she fought her own fears about what would happen to the children. "Time is what I have," Clara said, handing Noah back to Grace when he wouldn't stop crying. "I've come to stay in Savannah. I got a job at the hospital here. We're going to live together, the three of us." "And where are you going to live?" Robert asked. "I'm still looking, but I'll find something. The important thing is that we're together again." At that moment, the shop's bell rang again, and Karen entered uninvited. With a triumphant air. "Ah, so it's true," she exclaimed, looking at Clara. "The children's mother has shown up. I knew this abandonment story would cause trouble." Clara looked at Karen with suspicion. "Who are you?" "I'm Karen, Mrs. Evelyn's neighbor. And I'm the one who called Child Protective Services when I learned there were children in an irregular situation here." "Irregular situation," Clara repeated, her voice filled with indignation. "My children were being well cared for. Well cared for by people who weren't their family," Karen said. "But now that you've appeared, I imagine you'll be taking them away, right?" Karen's question echoed in the shop like a sentence. All eyes turned to Clara, awaiting her answer. "I will," she said, but her voice didn't sound as confident as before. "Of course I will." Grace clutched Noah to her chest and looked at Clara with her big, serious eyes. "Mom," she said, trying out the word that still sounded strange, "do you promise you won't leave me this time?" The simple question from a 4-year-old carried the weight of years of abandonment and fear. Clara knelt in front of her daughter, holding her small face in her trembling hands. "I promise," she said. "This time, Mommy promises she will never leave you again." But as she made that promise, Clara looked around the cozy shop, saw the evident affection that Evelyn and Robert felt for the children, noticed the security that Grace demonstrated in that environment, and a terrible doubt began to grow in her heart. Would taking the children from here really be the best for them, or would it be just another act of selfishness disguised as maternal love? The tension in the shop was almost palpable when Karen finally left, leaving behind a heavy silence filled with difficult decisions that needed to be made. Clara remained kneeling before Grace, still holding the girl's face, but her eyes showed a growing confusion. "Clara," Evelyn said softly, "why don't you stay for dinner with us? The children are tired, and we can talk better after they're asleep." The suggestion caught Clara off guard. She had arrived determined to take her children immediately, but now, faced with the reality of the situation, she realized she might need more time to think. I don't want to intrude," she said, slowly getting up. "You're not intruding," Robert assured her, surprising himself with his sincerity. "You're their mother. You have the right to get to know them better before making any decision." During dinner, a strange dynamic was established. Grace stayed close to Evelyn, but watched Clara with growing curiosity. Noah accepted a few spoonfuls of baby food from his biological mother, although he clearly preferred it when Grace fed him. Grace learned to take care of Noah on her own, Evelyn commented, watching how the girl automatically cleaned her brother's face. "I've never seen a child with such maternal instinct," She was always special, Clara said, a sad smile crossing her face. Even when she was little, she always took care of injured animals she found on the street. Once, she brought home a cat that had been hit by a car and... She stopped abruptly, realizing she had spoken in the past tense about a home that no longer existed. "Do you remember that, my princess?" she asked Grace. Grace nodded slowly. "Whiskers the cat. You made a little house for him in the yard and bought medicine at the pharmacy." "That's right," Clara said, moved that her daughter kept that memory. "You cried so much when he got better and left." "I didn't want him to leave," Grace said, her words carrying a deeper meaning that everyone understood. After dinner, while Grace played with Noah on the blanket spread on the floor, Clara helped Evelyn wash the dishes. The two women worked in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. "Evelyn," Clara said finally, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Do you think I'm a bad mother?" The question was so laden with pain that Evelyn stopped washing the dishes and looked at the younger woman. "Clara, you were sick. Sick people do things they wouldn't do if they were well. But that doesn't change the fact that I abandoned my children," Clara said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Twice." "You didn't abandon Noah," Evelyn corrected. "You brought him to a safe place when you realized you couldn't care for him properly." "But I left him at your door like a package," Clara protested. "I didn't even have the courage to ring the bell and explain the situation." "Sometimes love manifests in ways we don't understand at the moment," Evelyn said wisely. "You knew I would take good care of him. Your mother's heart knew." Nearby, Robert listened to the conversation while watching Grace teach Noah how to clap. The girl's dedication to her brother was impressive, but also worrying. She had taken on a responsibility that shouldn't belong to a child. "Grace," he called softly, "come here for a second." The girl approached, leaving Noah playing with some makeshift toys Evelyn had made from colorful scraps. "I want to ask you something important," Robert said, crouching to be at her level. "Do you want to stay with your mother?" The direct question caught Grace off guard. She looked at Clara, who had stopped helping with the dishes, to hear the answer, then at Evelyn, who tried to maintain a neutral expression. "I want everyone to stay together," she said finally. "I want Mom to stay here with us." "But what if that's not possible?" Robert insisted. "If you have to choose?" Grace was silent for a long moment, her large eyes reflecting a wisdom that shouldn't exist in a 4-year-old child. "I choose to stay where Noah will be best off," she said, "because I promised to take care of him." The answer struck Clara like a blade. Her own daughter was prioritizing her brother's well-being over her own desires. It was a direct reflection of how Grace had been forced to mature prematurely due to the circumstances of her life. "And if I promised that I'll take very good care of both of you?" Clara asked, approaching her daughter. "You promised before," Grace said without malice, just stating a fact. "And you had to break the promise because you got sick." "But now I'm well," Clara insisted. "And what if you get sick again?" The simple question echoed in the silent shop. It was the question everyone was thinking, but that no adult had dared to ask. Clara knelt before her daughter again, holding her small hands. "Grace, Mommy can't promise she'll never get sick again. No one can make that promise, but I can promise that now I know how to ask for help when I need it. And that I'll never again let sickness make me abandon you. What if Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Robert helped you take care of us?" Grace asked with the crystal-clear logic of children. The suggestion left all the adults speechless. It was such a simple and obvious solution that no one had considered it. "Grace," Evelyn said, finding her voice, "would you like your mother to live nearby so she could visit you every day?" "I'd like that a lot," Grace replied, smiling for the first time since Clara had arrived. Robert and Evelyn exchanged glances. "Clara," Robert said, "would you consider that possibility? Staying in Savannah? finding a place to live nearby, and we could build a sort of extended family. Clara looked around the cozy shop, saw Noah playing peacefully, observed the obvious affection that Evelyn and Robert felt for the children, and felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: genuine hope. You would do that, even after everything that's happened? These children have become part of our lives, Evelyn said, and you are their mother. We can find a way to make this work. But I don't have money to. Money is not a problem, Robert interrupted. There's a small apartment above Karen's cosmetics shop. The owner was trying to rent it out. I can talk to him. Above Karen's shop? Clara asked with apprehension. She'll have to get used to it, Robert said firmly. The children are the priority. At that moment, Noah started to cry, signaling that he was sleepy. Grace immediately stood up to get him, but Clara moved first. Can I try to put him to sleep? She asked hesitantly. Grace nodded, but stayed close as Clara picked up Noah and tried to calm him. The baby cried harder, clearly wanting Grace. He's not used to you yet, Grace said without malice, but he will get used to you if you come every day. Clara passed Noah to Grace, who immediately started humming her melody. In a few minutes, the baby relaxed and fell asleep in his sister's arms. How did she learn that song? Clara asked, recognizing the melody. She says her grandma, you, taught it to her, Evelyn replied. I used to sing that song to her when she was a baby, Clara remembered, emotional. It's incredible that she remembers. Children remember love, Evelyn said, even when other memories are lost. As Grace carefully placed Noah in his makeshift crib, Clara made a decision that would change everything. I want to try, she said. I want to try this extended family, but with one condition. Which is? Robert asked. If at any point you realize my presence isn't good for the children, do you promise you'll tell me, and that you'll do what's best for them, even if it means I have to step away? The generosity and selflessness of the request deeply touched Evelyn. Clara, you're putting your children's well-being above your own desire to have them back. That tells me you've truly changed. Because I understood one thing at the clinic, Clara said, watching Grace adjust the blanket over Noah. Love isn't possession. Love is doing what's best for the ones we love, even when it hurts. That night, for the first time in months, the embroidery shop housed a complete family. Unconventional, not perfect, but united by a genuine love for two children who had found each other amidst the chaos of their lives. But outside, Karen watched through the curtains of her shop, already planning her next interference in her neighbors' lives. 3 weeks had passed since Clara moved into the small apartment above the cosmetics shop, and a delicate but functional routine had been established. Every morning, Clara would come down to have breakfast with Evelyn, Robert, and the children before heading to work at the hospital. In the afternoon, she would return to help with Noah's care and play with Grace. To outside observers, it seemed like a perfect arrangement, but subtle tensions simmered beneath the seemingly harmonious surface. Mum, Noah woke up 3 times last night, Clara commented one morning as she prepared the baby's bottle. I think he might have colic. Grace usually knows when he's upset, Evelyn replied diplomatically. Why don't you ask her? Clara hesitated. While grateful for Grace's wisdom with her brother, she also felt diminished by her 4-year-old daughter's expertise in something that should have been maternal instinct. Grace, she called, trying to keep her tone casual, what do you think is bothering Noah? Grace, who was playing with some colorful scraps, looked up with her big, thoughtful eyes. I think he feels it when you get nervous, Mom. Babies feel those things. The observation, made with childlike innocence, hit Clara like a slap. It was true. She had been anxious, trying to compensate for years of absence by being the perfect mother. and this tension was affecting both her and the baby. Robert, who was observing the interaction over his newspaper, decided to intervene. "Clara, you're trying too hard. Relax. Nobody here is judging you." "But I'm judging myself," she admitted, sitting heavily in a chair. "I look at Grace taking care of Noah so naturally, and I wonder how a 4-year-old can be a better mother than I am." "She's not a better mother," Evelyn said firmly. "She's a protective sister who had to grow up too fast. And you're a woman who is learning to be a mother without the addiction that clouded your judgment. They're different things." At that moment, the shop bell rang, and Karen entered with a satisfied expression that immediately put everyone on alert. "Good morning, everyone," she said with false cordiality. "I came to let you know I had an interesting visitor last night." "What kind of visitor?" Robert asked, not hiding his irritation. "An elegant, well-dressed lady, asking about the children's situation here. She said she was." "What was it she said?" "Oh yes, a social worker from the juvenile court." Clara's blood ran cold. "A social worker? But Valerie has already been here, and everything is sorted out." "This wasn't Valerie," Karen said with a malicious smile. "It was someone else, a Mrs. Margaret something. She said she received an anonymous tip about irregularities in the children's documentation." "Anonymous tip," Robert repeated, looking directly at Karen. "How convenient." "It wasn't me," Karen defended herself, but her tone was unconvincing. "I just answered the question she asked. I said the children's mother had recently appeared, that she lived in an apartment that was too small, that she had a history of alcoholism." "Karen!" Evelyn exploded. "How dare you?" "I only told the truth," Karen retorted, "and the truth is that these children are in a confusing situation, with a mother who just got out of rehab living separately from them, and you all playing family without any proper legal documentation." Clara stood up abruptly, her hands trembling. "What else did you tell this woman?" "Just what everyone already knows. That the girl lived on the street, that the baby was abandoned, that you disappeared for over a year." "Stop!" shouted Grace, making everyone turn to her. The girl was standing, holding Noah against her chest, her eyes shining with angry tears. "Stop talking bad about my mom." The child's cry echoed in the shop, followed by a tense silence. Noah, startled by the loud voice, began to cry. "Grace, dear," Evelyn began, but the girl interrupted her. "No, I'm tired of her talking bad about us. My mom is trying really hard, and Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Robert take care of us, and we're happy. Why does she want to ruin everything?" The sincerity and passion in Grace's voice left even Karen speechless for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Children don't understand these things," she said, trying to maintain a condescending tone. "What matters is what's best for them in the long run." "Oh, and who decided you know what's best for them?" Robert asked, getting up and positioning himself between Karen and the children. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, Karen said, crossing her arms. "I know all the families. I know when things aren't right. And this situation is not right." "You know what's not right?" said a new voice from the door. They all turned to see Valerie Scott, the official social worker, entering the shop with a serious expression on her face. "What's not right," Valerie continued, "is someone impersonating a court employee to obtain information about minors under protection." Karen turned pale. "I didn't know that." "You spoke with a person who has no legal authority to investigate this case," Valerie said firmly, "and you provided personal information about minors to a stranger. That could be considered a crime." "But she said she was from the court," Karen protested. "And did you check her credentials, ask for identification, request official documents?" Valerie asked. "Or did you just take her word for it because you wanted an opportunity to tell everything you knew?" Karen was left without an answer, realizing she had been deceived and manipulated. Who was this woman? Clara asked, her voice tense with worry. Valerie consulted her notes. Based on the description we got, we believe it's Margaret Bishop, and we have reason to suspect she's no stranger to this situation. What do you mean? Evelyn asked. Mrs. Clara, Valerie said, addressing the young mother directly. Could you tell us about your mother, Mrs. Margaret? Clara's face lost all color. My mother? But how? She can't. I thought. She's looking for her grandchildren, Valerie said, and apparently she's not happy with the current arrangement. The revelation hit everyone like an earthquake. Clara sat down heavily, her legs no longer able to support her. My mother came for the children, she whispered, after kicking me out of the house, after having me committed. Now she wants my children. Grace, even without fully understanding the situation, sensed the desperation in her mother's voice. Mom, who is this grandma we don't know? Clara looked at her daughter, trying to find words to explain a situation she could barely process herself. She's Mommy's mother, but she's not a good person, my princess. She hurts the people she loves. Like Aunt Clara used to hurt you? Grace asked with the direct logic of children. Worse, Clara replied, tears streaming down her face. Robert approached Valerie. What legal rights does this woman have over the children? As a grandmother, technically some, especially if she can prove the mother is unfit, Valerie replied. But based on what I'm seeing here, Clara is doing well, and the children are clearly thriving. So there's nothing to worry about, Evelyn said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Unfortunately, there is, Valerie said. Mrs. Margaret has hired a lawyer, and she's preparing a lawsuit to gain custody of the children. The silence that followed was total. Even Noah stopped crying, as if he sensed the tension in the air. She can do that? Robert asked. She can try, Valerie answered. And considering the financial resources she appears to have and Clara's complicated history, she might have a chance of succeeding. Clara stood up abruptly. No, she said in a firm voice. I won't let her do to my children what she did to me. What are you going to do? Evelyn asked. I'm going to fight, Clara replied, looking at Grace and Noah with a determination no one had seen in her before. I'm going to fight for them with all the strength I have. But as she made that brave promise, everyone in the room knew they were about to face the toughest battle of their lives. And this time, it wouldn't just be against prejudice or bureaucracy. It would be against a woman who had money, influence, and a personal vendetta to satisfy. The week following the revelation about Margaret was a whirlwind of legal consultations, documents, and mounting tension. Robert had hired the best family lawyer in Savannah, Mr. Harrison, a 60-year-old man with a reputation for never losing cases involving children. The situation is complex, Mr. Harrison explained during his first visit to the shop. Mrs. Margaret has considerable resources and is alleging that Clara is unstable due to her history of alcoholism. She also questions the suitability of two elderly people caring for young children. Elderly? Evelyn protested, indignant. I'm 77, but I'm in perfect health. I know, Mrs. Miller, but unfortunately the law sometimes only considers numbers, not actual capability, the lawyer said gently. That's why we need to build a very strong case, showing that the children are thriving in the current environment. Clara, who had visibly lost weight due to stress, held Noah while listening to the legal explanations. Mr. Harrison, what exactly is my mother alleging? That you are a negligent mother who abandoned her children to do drugs, that you are living in inadequate conditions, and that the children are being raised by unqualified strangers, Mr. Harrison read from his documents. Every word was like a dagger to Clara's heart. But I never did drugs. It was just alcohol, and I've been clean for almost a year. We know that, and will prove it. But she's also alleging that you falsified information about your condition when you left Noah at the shop's door, the lawyer continued. Grace, who was playing quietly in the corner of the shop, looked up. Even at 4 years old, she could sense the anguish of the adults around her. "Mom," she said, approaching Clara, "why does the mean grandma want to take us?" Clara hugged her daughter, trying to find words to explain a situation she herself didn't fully understand. Because she thinks she can take better care of you. But she never took care of you when you were little, Grace said, with the relentless logic of children. The observation struck everyone present. Mr. Harrison made a note. "Grace, has your mother ever told you what it was like living with your grandmother Margaret?" Grace shook her head. "She only said Grandma Margaret was very mean and made Mom cry." "Clara," the lawyer said, "I'm going to need you to tell me everything about your childhood. I know it's painful, but it could be crucial for the case." Over the next 2 hours, Clara revealed a childhood marked by excessive control, severe punishments for minor mistakes, and constant criticism that had destroyed her self-esteem. She described how Margaret had kicked her out of the house at 17 when she discovered the pregnancy, and how her mother had emotionally blackmailed her into entering the rehab clinic. "She always said I was a disappointment," Clara concluded, tears streaming down her face, "that I would never be good for anything. When I found out I was pregnant with Grace, the first thing she said was that I was going to destroy an innocent child's life." Grace moved even closer to her mother, instinctively offering comfort without fully understanding what was being said. "And now she wants to raise your children," Mr. Harrison observed. "Interesting. I'll investigate her history as well." 3 days later, the lawyer returned with information that completely changed the perspective of the case. "Margaret Bishop," he announced, "has an interesting history. Widowed for 15 years, heiress to a local construction company, no other children besides Clara. But here's the most important part. She has been in psychiatric treatment for a control disorder and episodes of severe depression." "Psychiatric treatment?" Robert repeated. "Yes, and even more interesting, she has tried to gain custody of 3 other children in the last 10 years, all grandchildren of friends she considered unfit. She lost all the cases." "She has an obsession with controlling children," Evelyn murmured, horrified. "Apparently, yes, and now she's discovered she has biological grandchildren," said Mr. Harrison. "This could be seen as an opportunity to satisfy that need for control." At that moment, the shop bell rang, and an elegant woman of about 55 entered with an imperial posture. Perfectly coiffed grey hair, expensive clothes, and an expression of superiority that made everyone instinctively stiffen. "So this is where my grandchildren are," Margaret said. Her voice filled with authority and contempt. The silence in the shop was total. Clara automatically pulled Grace close, while Evelyn held Noah protectively. "Mother," Clara said, her voice trembling, "what are you doing here?" "I came to meet the children my negligent daughter abandoned," Margaret replied, her eyes scanning the shop with obvious disdain, "and to see the deplorable conditions in which they are being raised." "The conditions are not deplorable," Robert defended, standing up. "The children are healthy, happy, and loved." "Loved by strangers," Margaret retorted, "instead of being raised by their rightful family." "Rightful family?" Clara exploded. "You kicked me out of the house. You said I was a disgrace. And now you want my children?" "I want to save these children from the same fate you had, from the same incompetence you inherited from me," Margaret said with brutal coldness. Grace, who was watching everything with wide eyes, finally found the courage to speak. "Are you Grandma Margaret?" Margaret looked at the girl, and for a moment her expression softened. "I am, my dear. I'm your real grandmother. My mom said you're mean, Grace said with childish honesty. Your mother lies a lot, Margaret replied, crouching down to be at the child's level. I'm not mean. I just want what's best for you and your little brother. What's best for us is to stay here, Grace said firmly, with Mom and Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Robert. You're too little to understand these things, Margaret said, trying to touch Grace's face. The girl instinctively recoiled. I understand that you made my mom cry, and people who make others cry are not good. The granddaughter's rejection visibly hit Margaret, but she quickly recomposed her authoritarian expression. Clara, you've poisoned this child against me, she accused. I only told the truth, Clara replied, finding courage in her daughter's presence. The truth is that you're an alcoholic who abandoned her own children, Margaret said cruelly, and now you're using these people to pretend you're a good mother. Clara has changed, Evelyn said, no longer able to stay silent. She's sober, working, taking care of the children. Give her a chance. And who are you to have an opinion on my family? Margaret asked, turning her attention to Evelyn. I'm the person who cared for these children when they needed it most, Evelyn replied with dignity, and who will continue to care for them for as long as necessary. Not for long, Margaret said with a cold smile. My lawyer has already filed the lawsuit. In 2 weeks, you'll have to hand over the children to their real family. We have a lawyer too, Robert said, and we're going to fight this. Fight with what money? With what influence? Margaret laughed. You're simple people fighting against someone with unlimited resources. It's a losing battle. At that moment, Noah started to cry in Evelyn's arms, frightened by the loud voices. Grace immediately went to him, starting to hum her usual melody. Margaret watched the interaction with attention, seeing how the baby calmed down only with his sister's presence. Interesting, she murmured. The girl has a way with children. Grace has been taking care of Noah since he was born, Clara said with pride. A child shouldn't have that responsibility, Margaret said. It's further proof that you don't know how to raise children properly. It's proof that she's a loving sister, Robert protested. Margaret stood up, smoothing her expensive clothes. I've seen what I needed to see. In 2 weeks, when the judge decides in favor of the rightful family, you will hand over the children voluntarily, or they will be removed by force. Wait, said Mr. Harrison, who had remained silent observing the entire interaction. Mrs. Margaret, I presume? Yes, and you are. Mr. Harrison, the family's lawyer, and I need to inform you that any attempt at intimidation or threats can be used against you in the proceedings. I'm not intimidating anyone, Margaret said. I'm just informing you of the legal reality. The legal reality is that this case has not yet been decided, Mr. Harrison replied, and we have substantial evidence that the children are in a loving and stable environment. We'll see, Margaret said, heading for the door. She stopped and looked at Grace one more time. My dear, when you come to live with me, you will have everything a girl could want. Toys, beautiful clothes, a private school. I just want to stay with my family, Grace replied, holding Clara's hand. Your family is me, Margaret said firmly, and soon you will understand that. After she left, the silence in the shop was oppressive. Everyone knew they had just met the real enemy, not just a possessive grandmother, but a woman determined to control and possess, regardless of what was best for the children. The war for the soul of that family had officially begun. The days following Margaret's visit were a roller coaster of emotions and disturbing discoveries. Mr. Harrison worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and witnesses, but each day brought more worrying news about the resources and influence Margaret was mobilizing. She has hired not 1, but 3 of the best law firms in the region, Mr. Harrison informed them during a tense meeting in the shop. And there's something more disturbing. She's offering money for people in the neighborhood to testify against you. Testify about what? Robert asked, indignant. Anything that could be interpreted as negligence or inadequacy. Bernard from the pharmacy approached me yesterday, saying she offered him $500 to sign a paper saying he saw Grace begging for food on the street recently. Clara covered her face with her hands. She's bribing people to lie about us. Bernard refused, Mr. Harrison continued, but others might not. She's being very systematic. Grace, playing with Noah on the blanket, stopped to listen to the conversation, though she didn't fully understand the legal implications. "Mom," she said, "why does Grandma Margaret want to take us so badly if she doesn't even like children?" The innocent question revealed a surprising insight. Clara knelt beside her daughter. "What makes you think she doesn't like children?" "Because when she looked at me, her eyes were sad and angry at the same time, like she wanted a doll, not a real girl." Grace's observation was so perceptive, it left the adult speechless. Mr. Harrison made a note. This perception could be important. Children often pick up on things that adults miss. At that moment, the bell rang and Valerie, the social worker, entered with a grave expression. "I need to talk to you about something urgent," she said. "Mrs. Margaret has requested an official inspection of the children's living conditions. A judge has authorized it, and the inspection will happen tomorrow." "But the conditions are adequate," Evelyn protested. "The shop is clean, the children have everything they need." "I know," Valerie said, but she also alleged that she discovered irregularities in the temporary custody documentation. "She's questioning my professional competence." The revelation hit everyone like a punch. Margaret wasn't just attacking the family, she was attacking the very professionals who supported them. "Can she do that?" Robert asked. "Unfortunately, yes. And there's more," Valerie continued, hesitating. "She presented a psychological evaluation claiming that Clara has dependent personality disorder and is unfit to raise children." "What evaluation?" Clara exploded. "I've never had any psychological exam." "Apparently, she gained access to your records from the rehab clinic and hired a psychiatrist to reinterpret the original diagnosis." The desperation in Clara's voice was palpable. "She's destroying everything, like she always has." Mr. Harrison leaned forward. "Clara, I need you to authorize me to request your complete medical records from the clinic. If there's manipulation in the reports, we will prove it." "Do whatever is necessary," Clara said without hesitation. That night, the tension in the house had become unbearable. Grace, though just a child, sensed that something terrible was happening. Noah cried more than usual, picking up on the stress of the adults around him. "Evelyn," Robert said when they were alone in the kitchen, "I'm thinking of something drastic." "What do you mean?" "What if we ran away, took the children to another state where Margaret couldn't find them?" Evelyn looked at her son in shock. "Robert, that would be kidnapping. It would turn you into criminals." "Better to be criminals than to see these children in that woman's hands," he said with desperate determination. "And then what? Live as fugitives forever. Grace could never go to school, have friends, have a normal life." Robert knew his mother was right, but despair consumed him. "So what do we do? Just sit here and wait for her to destroy our family?" "We fight," Evelyn said firmly. "We fight with the truth, with love, with dignity, and we trust that justice will prevail." But her words sounded weak even to herself. The next morning, the official inspection took place with a bureaucratic rigidity that turned the cozy shop into a legal battlefield. 3 court employees measured every room, photographed every corner, questioned every arrangement. "Where do the children sleep?" asked the head inspector, a stern, middle-aged woman. "Grace sleeps here in the corner we prepared for her," Evelyn showed, "and Noah in the crib we set up next to my bed. Children of different ages should have separate rooms, the inspector noted. They want to stay together, Clara explained. Grace feels responsible for taking care of her brother. A 4-year-old child shouldn't have that kind of responsibility, the inspector retorted, echoing the exact words Margaret had used. Throughout the inspection, it became clear that the questions and objections followed a predetermined script, as if the inspector already knew what to look for and what conclusions to draw. "Where is the adequate play space for the children?" another inspector asked. "The whole place is a play space," Grace answered unexpectedly. "I play with the scraps over there, I draw at that table, and I read books with Mrs. Evelyn on the couch." "And are you happy living here?" the inspector asked, crouching down to be at the girl's level. "Very happy," Grace replied without hesitation. "Here, everyone loves me and no one hurts me." "And what if you could live in a big house with a yard and lots of toys?" Grace thought for a moment. "If my family came too, I'd like that. But if it was just me and Noah, no." "Why not?" "Because a big house without love is just a big house," Grace answered with the simple wisdom of children. The answer was clearly not what the inspector expected to hear. She made a few notes and continued with other technical questions. When the inspection ended, everyone knew the outcome would not be favorable. The questions had been biased, the notes focused on the negative aspects, and the general attitude of the inspectors suggested a verdict had already been decided. "How long until we know the result?" Mr. Harrison asked. 3 business days, the head inspector replied. "The report will be sent directly to the judge handling the case." After the inspectors left, the family gathered in the shop in a heavy silence. Everyone knew their chances were dwindling rapidly. "Mr. Harrison," Clara finally said, "be honest with us. What are our real chances?" The lawyer sighed deeply. "With the resources Margaret is mobilizing, the influence she has, and now this inspection that was clearly targeted, I'd say we have maybe a 30% chance." 30%, Evelyn repeated, despair evident in her voice. "But there's still hope." Mr. Harrison continued quickly. "I'm working on some strategies, and we have an ace up our sleeve that she doesn't expect." "What ace?" Robert asked. "The children themselves. If we can get the judge to talk directly with Grace, without the presence of lawyers or outside influence, I believe she herself can show where the truth lies." "A 4-year-old child as our last hope," Clara murmured. "Sometimes children are wiser than adults," said Mr. Harrison, "and Grace shows exceptional emotional maturity." That night, as Grace helped Evelyn put Noah to sleep, she asked a question that broke everyone's heart. "Mrs. Evelyn," she said softly, "if Grandma Margaret takes us, will you forget about us?" Evelyn hugged the girl tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Never, my dear, never in my life." "And what if she doesn't let us see you?" "Then I will wait. I will wait as long as it takes until you're grown up and can choose where you want to be." Grace nodded solemnly, as if memorizing every word to carry with her into the uncertain darkness that was approaching. The next day, Mr. Harrison arrived with news that changed everything once again. "I just received a call," he announced, barely able to contain his excitement. "A former employee of Margaret's construction company wants to testify. He has information about how she treats employees and subordinates, and apparently there are records of violent episodes in the past." For the first time in days, a glimmer of hope shone in everyone's eyes. But that hope would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The hope that Mr. Harrison had brought with the news of the new witness lasted exactly 18 hours. The next morning, he arrived at the shop with a devastated expression that made everyone's hearts sink. "Robert Silver, the former employee who was going to testify," he began in a heavy voice, "retracted his statement last night." "What do you mean, retracted?" Robert asked, already fearing the answer. He said he was confused, that his memories weren't reliable, that he didn't want to get involved in a family dispute, Mr. Harrison explained. But from the tone of his voice it was clear he was pressured. Clara let out a moan of despair. She got to him before we did. And there's more. The lawyer continued reluctantly. The inspection report was expedited. It usually takes a week, but it came out this morning, and it's devastating. Evelyn sat down heavily, holding Noah to her chest. What does it say? That the living conditions are inadequate for young children, that there's no appropriate educational structure, that Grace shows signs of precocious maturity due to neglect, and that the environment is emotionally unstable. But that's a lie, protested Grace, who was listening to everything with growing attention. I like living here, and I'm not neglected. What's neglected? Mr. Harrison knelt beside the girl. It means not being taken care of properly. And you are not neglected, Grace. You are very loved and cared for. Then why did they write that? The simple question echoed in the silent shop. How could they explain to a 4-year-old that adults could lie about something so serious? Because sometimes people make mistakes, Mr. Harrison answered carefully, and our job is to show them it was a mistake. But even as he spoke, everyone knew their chances were running out fast. When is the hearing? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon, Mr. Harrison replied. The judge wants to decide quickly, considering it involves minors. 1 day, Evelyn murmured. Just 1 day to save our family. That afternoon, as they tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children, Clara made a decision that surprised everyone. I want to take the children to meet my father, she announced unexpectedly. Your father? Robert asked. You never mentioned your father. Because he died when I was 15, Clara explained. He's buried in St. Francis Cemetery. I want Grace and Noah to meet the grandfather they'll never get to know for real. The idea seemed strange at first, but Evelyn understood. You want to show them where they came from, their true history. Exactly. If tomorrow doesn't go well, at least they'll know they had a grandfather who was a good person. The trip to the cemetery was quiet and solemn. Grace held Clara's hand as they walked among the graves until they reached a simple tomb with a white-painted wooden cross. This is your Grandpa Charles, Clara said, kneeling before the headstone. He was a mechanic. He fixed cars. He had big, calloused hands, but he was very kind. Was he good? Grace asked, carefully touching the wooden cross. Very good. He protected me from your Grandma Margaret when she got really angry. After he died, everything got worse at home. Grace was silent for a moment, processing the information. Mum, do you think Grandpa Charles is watching over us from heaven? I'm sure he is, Clara replied, hugging her daughter, and I'm sure he's proud of the brave girl you are. When they returned to the shop, they found Mr. Harrison waiting with an expression that mixed hope and apprehension. I have news, he announced. I got the judge to agree to a private conversation with Grace before the official hearing. Is that good? Evelyn asked. It might be our last chance. If Grace can convey to the judge what she truly feels, if she can show the maturity and happiness we see in her every day. And what if she gets nervous? What if she can't speak? Clara worried. Then we lose, Mr. Harrison said with brutal honesty. But if we don't try, we lose anyway. That night, Clara sat beside Grace's makeshift bed for a talk she knew could be one of their last. My princess, she began softly, tomorrow you're going to talk to a very important man, a judge. Is he like a king? And Grace asked. Similar, he makes important decisions about families, and he wants to know what you think about our family. And I'm going to say that our family is the best in the world, Grace said with conviction. But what if he asks if you'd like to live in a big house with lots of toys? I'll say I'd rather stay where there's love, Grace replied without hesitation. Clara hugged her daughter, trying to burn that moment into her memory forever. On the day of the hearing, the tension was almost physical. Grace had woken up earlier than usual and insisted on wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with yellow flowers that Evelyn had made, especially for her. "Do I look pretty to talk to the judge?" she asked, twirling to show off the dress. "You look beautiful," Evelyn replied, fighting back tears. "But remember, the most important thing isn't to be pretty on the outside, it's to show your beauty on the inside." When they arrived at the courthouse, Margaret was already there with her team of 3 lawyers, all impeccably dressed and carrying voluminous briefcases. She looked at Grace with an expression that mixed possessiveness and anticipated triumph. "Hello, my dear," she said, approaching the girl. "Today is a very important day for our family." "I already have a family," Grace replied politely but firmly. "Soon you'll have an even better family," Margaret said, completely ignoring the child's response. When Grace was called into the judge's chambers, she followed calmly, but she looked back once, searching for the faces of her chosen family. "It's all going to be okay," Clara whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Inside the room, Judge Mario Augustus, a 62-year-old with a reputation for being fair but strict, watched the small girl sit in the chair they had adjusted for her height. "Hi, Grace," he said gently. "My name is Judge Mario. Can I ask you a few questions?" "Oh, you can," Grace replied, her small hands folded in her lap. "Can you tell me what your day is like? What do you do when you wake up?" "First, I check if Noah is okay," Grace began. "Then I have breakfast with Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Robert. Then I help in the shop, play with my little brother, and in the afternoon, Mum comes home from work and we're all together." "And you like this routine?" "I like it a lot. It's like having lots of parents taking care of us." The judge made some notes. "Grace, do you know that your grandmother Margaret wants you to live with her?" "I know, but I don't want to." "Why not? She can give you things that you might not have now." Grace thought for a moment before answering. "Judge Mario, do you have children?" The question caught the judge off guard. "I do, one daughter." "And if someone offered your daughter lots of toys but said she couldn't live with you anymore, would you let her go?" The judge stopped writing and looked directly at the girl. "No, of course not." "Then you understand why I don't want to leave my family," Grace said with devastating simplicity. "And what if I told you that your grandmother is also your family?" "Family isn't just who has the same blood," Grace replied. "Family is who takes care of you when you're sad, who is happy when you're happy, and who never abandons you. Grandma Margaret abandoned my mom. People who abandon aren't real family." The judge was silent for a long moment, clearly impacted by the child's wisdom. "Grace, last question. What would you do if I said you had to choose between staying with your mother or with Mrs. Evelyn and Mr. Robert?" "I would ask you not to make us choose," she replied, "because when people really love each other, they find a way to stay together." When Grace left the room, all eyes turned to her, trying to read on the child's face how the conversation had gone. "Was it good?" Clara asked anxiously. "I told the truth," Grace replied, "and the truth is that I love all of you." Now, all that was left was to wait for the judge to make the decision that would define all their futures. The official hearing began 2 hours after the private conversation between Grace and the judge. The courtroom was divided into 2 distinct sides. On one, Margaret, with her 3 impeccable lawyers and a stack of documents that seemed to have been prepared for months. On the other, Mr. Harrison, with Clara, Evelyn, and Robert, appearing to be at a clear numerical and financial disadvantage. Judge Mario Augustus entered the room with an indecipherable expression, carrying a folder that contained not just the case files, but the future of an entire family. "This is a complex case," he began, settling into his chair. "We have a grandmother with considerable resources requesting custody of 2 grandchildren, alleging that the biological mother is unfit and that the current environment does not provide the necessary structure for the healthy development of the children." Margaret smiled discreetly, realizing the judge was starting with the points favorable to her case. "On the other hand," Judge Mario continued, "we have a mother in recovery, supported by a substitute family that shows genuine love for the children. And most importantly, we have 2 children who appear to be thriving in the current environment." Margaret's smile faltered. "Before I make my decision," the judge said, "I would like to hear some testimony. Mrs. Margaret, you may begin by explaining why you believe you should have custody of your grandchildren." Margaret stood up elegantly, adjusting her expensive suit. "Your Honor, my daughter Clara has always had problems with emotional instability and chemical dependency. She abandoned these children not once, but twice. The girl spent a year living on the streets, suffering unimaginable hardships. The baby was left on a stranger's doorstep like an unwanted package. Her words were calculated to wound, and Clara felt each one like a stab. I can offer these children financial stability, quality education, premium medical care, and most importantly, a permanent home where they won't have to worry about the possibility of being abandoned again." "And what about the emotional aspect?" the judge asked. "The children have shown a clear preference for the current arrangement." "Children don't know what's best for them," Margaret replied without hesitation, "especially a traumatized child like Grace. She has attached herself to the first people who offered her stability, but that doesn't mean it's the best environment for her development." "Clara," the judge said, "I would like to hear your side." Clara stood up on trembling legs, her hands damp with sweat. "Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes. I abandoned my children when I was sick, and that guilt will follow me forever. But I managed to get better. I found work, and more importantly, I found a family that accepts me with all my flaws and helps me be a better mother." Her voice gained strength as she spoke. "My mother talks about giving the children stability, but she kicked me out of the house when she found out about my pregnancy. She talks about love, but she never showed love even to me when I was a child. How can I believe it will be different with my children?" "These are serious accusations," the judge said. "Do you have proof?" Mr. Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to present a document that came into our hands this morning." He handed a folder to the judge, who opened it and began to read with growing attention. "This is a medical report from when Clara was 16. It shows she was hospitalized with multiple fractures, allegedly from a fall down the stairs. But the medical analysis suggests a pattern consistent with physical assault." Margaret turned visibly pale. That was an accident." "There's more," Mr. Harrison continued. "School records showing that Clara frequently missed classes with domestic injuries. And a testimony from a neighbor at the time, a Mrs. Rosa Santos, reporting that she often heard screams and crying coming from the Bishop family home." "This is slander," Margaret protested, but her voice no longer sounded convincing. "There is also," said Mr. Harrison, "a police record of a complaint filed by Clara's own father against Margaret for domestic abuse, which was only dropped because he passed away before the investigation was concluded." The silence in the room was deafening. Margaret looked around, realizing that the entire carefully constructed framework of her case was collapsing. "Your Honor," she said, trying to regain control, "that was a long time ago. I've changed." "How have you changed?" the judge interrupted. "Because according to the reports I have here, you have tried to gain custody of other children in recent years, always alleging that the parents were unfit. You lost every case. It was then that something no one expected happened. Margaret, always so controlled, began to break down emotionally. "I just wanted a chance," she said, tears starting to stream down her face. "A chance to do it right, to be the mother, the grandmother I could never be." "At the cost of separating a family that has already found its balance?" the judge asked. I couldn't accept that my daughter achieved what I never could, a family that truly loves her. I was jealous," Margaret admitted, her voice breaking. The confession echoed through the room like a bomb. Even her own lawyers seemed shocked. "Mrs. Margaret," the judge said more gently, "you need professional help. This is not the way." Margaret nodded, defeated. "I know. I've always known." The judge turned to Clara. "Clara, despite everything your mother has done, she is still your mother. Would you be able to forgive her, to let her have contact with her grandchildren under supervision?" Clara looked at the woman who had made her childhood a hell, who had tried to destroy the family she had built with so much effort, and surprisingly, she felt not anger, but pity. "Your Honor, if she truly seeks treatment and manages to change, if she accepts that she cannot control our lives, then yes, the children deserve to know all their grandparents." "And you," the judge said, addressing Evelyn and Robert, "would you be willing to legally formalize this unconventional family?" "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked. "Joint adoption. Clara would retain legal custody, but you would be officially recognized as a permanent substitute family. The children would have multiple legal guardians." "Is that possible?" Robert asked, surprised. "In exceptional cases, yes. And this is clearly an exceptional case." At that moment, the courtroom door opened and Grace entered, followed by Valerie, who was carrying Noah. "I'm sorry, Your Honor," Valerie said, but Grace insisted she needed to speak. The judge smiled. "Of course. What did you want to say, Grace?" The girl walked to the center of the room, looking at all the adults present. When her eyes met Margaret's, who was still crying silently, her expression softened. "Grandma Margaret," she said in her clear voice, "are you sad?" Margaret nodded, unable to speak. "My mom taught me that when people are very sad for a very long time, they get sick," Grace continued, "and when they're sick they do bad things without meaning to." She approached Margaret. "If you promise you'll take care of yourself and get well, you can visit us sometimes, but only if you promise you won't try to take us away." The simplicity and generosity of the child broke the last shred of Margaret's resistance. She knelt before her granddaughter, sobbing. "I promise," she said. "I promise I'll take care of myself and try to be a real grandmother." Judge Mario Augustus brought down the gavel. "Considering all the factors presented, and especially the evident well-being of the children in their current environment, I rule that custody shall remain with Clara Bishop, with the official support of Evelyn and Robert Miller as a recognized substitute family. Margaret Bishop must seek psychological counseling as a condition for supervised visits." When they left the courthouse, the July sun in Savannah had never seemed so bright. Grace held Clara's hand with one of hers and Evelyn's with the other, while Robert carried Noah. "Are we a real family on paper now too?" Grace asked. "Now we're a real family in every way," Clara replied, hugging her daughter. 6 months later, the embroidery shop had transformed into the heart of a happy and functional extended family. Clara worked at the hospital in the morning and helped Evelyn in the shop in the afternoon. Robert had reduced his travels to spend more time with the children. And Margaret, after months of therapy, made supervised bi-weekly visits, slowly learning to be a grandmother without trying to control. Grace had started school and excelled both academically and socially, always proudly talking about her big family to her classmates. Noah was growing up healthy and happy, surrounded by love and care. And every afternoon, when the shop's traffic slowed down, Grace would still hum that soft melody that calmed any worried heart, a song that now represented not just survival, but the discovery that family isn't about blood or conventions, but about choice, love, and the commitment to care for one another through all of life's storms. In the small embroidery shop in Savannah, 5 hearts that had been broken by life found healing in each other, proving that sometimes miracles come disguised as second chances and that true love always finds a way to win. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you so much.